Hello and welcome to the Angelati studio. We're now joined by Kjartan from Cuculus, and we're going to try and tackle something quite complex. We had a long meeting last night, and I've been thinking about it overnight. How do we do it? And we're going to make the postulation that the energy market is broken for the modern situation we were put in. Before we start, can you just give a little bit of background about you and your experience, which will then add some weight to some of the comments that we're going to make through the session?
Yeah. I've been working in the utility sector since 2001. I was managing the customer business of Nuon, Dutch utility, both in Netherlands and also in Belgium and Germany. So I know the energy market quite well. I know the competitive market. I know the game with the regulator. I was also chairman of the Dutch Energy Retail Association for many years then. And since 2010 I'm the CEO of Cuculus GmbH. We are a software company supplying systems for utilities to do smart metering, smart home, smart energy management and so on.
Right. Let's try and speed into the heart of what we're going to try and do and try and get this done in 15 minutes, which may be a challenge. But when you were talking off last night, you were saying that this whole notion, and I'm going to personalize it a little bit just to illustrate the point, of me being delighted about the fact that I can guarantee my energy tariff for a year or a year and a half is actually misguided and misjudged for the modern world, and is actually, when you articulate what's going on in the market, costing me more than it should do. Yeah. You just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, it's basically a heritage from the old way energy markets work. So before we had power plants, we had stable coal-fired power plants to do the base load, we had gas-fired flex plants to do balancing and so on. And we tried to build a stable system, which also gave stable stable prices to customers. What's happened with that system?
So these things are entirely within our control. We can turn it up and down on the gas side of things, and maybe less so with the baseload, but it's within our control.
And the chain we have for that is also aligned. So we control the generation, we offer stable prices to consumers, and the whole chain is working like this. Now what's happening with renewables is that we are getting more and more volatility that we cannot control into the system. And if you look at some of the markets that have gone the furthest, like some of the part of the states in Germany, you have 37% renewables. Denmark has 27-ish and so on. And this is creating a great deal of volatility in the production of that we cannot control. And what's also happened is that spark spread, so the prices that is paid for the fuels for additional, has turned out towards coal-fired power plants, and there's really no business case for the flexible gas-fired power plants left. And this is basically creating a very weird and crazy situation.
And that's a little bit ironic though, because actually those very gas-fired power plants are the things that we would need to counterbalance this intermittent power that's coming onto the grid.
Exactly, and that's why in many countries now there are discussions, capacity markets, to make sure that we keep reserve capacity in the system. The ironic thing in this whole part is that who is paying for all these renewable assets? In most countries, it's some kind of subsidy form. Germany is famous for their markup on the electricity price. And the consumer is paying a huge part of this investments in the new capacity.
And because in Germany, it's famously it's a flat rate, which
it's a markup of the electricity price. Right. And in many of these markets, this is getting a big concern because the consumer is paying more and more for these renewable assets. They have to pay for the capacity markets. But what consumers don't know, but it's also happening under the surface, is that because of the volatility, utilities need to add risk markups in the normal pricing of the normal energy contracts.
Right. So I'm asking all these questions just so that I completely keep up with what's going on, because energy trading is not what I normally cover. So and it does get complex. So that very volatility is adding another cost to the system, let alone the management of it from a technical point of view. That the electricity suppliers and retailers are putting in a risk factor in that if we suddenly get to a day when it's all 100% renewable, I am not losing out. Have I articulated that correctly?
A day with all renewables will probably be a day with very low market prices, but the electricity for the consumer is acquired in advance. So buying in, sourcing the electricity is basically happening in three markets. The forward market, where I can buy electricity to deliver in half a year, as an example, or in 3 months maybe. The day ahead market, where I can purchase electricity to be delivered next day, and the intraday market for last minute balancing. And what energy companies are doing to get a stable price is they are purchasing, they're estimating how much electricity they need next 3 months, half year, and then for every day they are trying to purchase that amount. And this is done in the so-called forward market.
So they're buying it 3 months ahead, effectively.
3 months, something like that. And then they will say, maybe mid-December, say, okay, the next half year electricity prices will be this. So everybody knows what they're up. To get this stable electricity price, they had to add a risk markup to cover this increased volatility that is created by renewables. And the more renewables you get in the market,
the higher
this risk market is getting. So it's not a good situation. And this is one of the key effects why the current system is not going to work. If you go much further with renewables, it's just
because it's a self-perpetuating thing. The more this volatility comes in,
the subsidies are going to go up, the risk markets are going up. So
and that is going to be a hard sell to the end consumer at some point or the other, because they're like, hang on a minute, I thought all this renewable is supposed to be cheaper, and why is this suddenly? So that's where we are. So okay, so that's where we are. This is the market spiral that is causing this thing. How do you solve it?
Well, I mean, it's actually been solved.
Right.
You have examples of some very volatile markets in Europe, particularly in Scandinavia, and people think that's strange because it's all hydro mainly. But in the winter situation, where you have little water in the hydro in the mountains and so on, because it's frozen, and a lot of people are heating with electricity, you get sky-high prices. So this is a market where people are traditionally they're used to having very volatile markets. And when the electricity market opened up there, people had a choice. They could opt for stable pricing or for day ahead or dynamic pricing. And there was, of course, a lot of discussion. What's better? Because when it's very cold and you have to heat your home, it hurts. But at the same time, it became very clear for consumers that even though that you have those hits, structurally, you are much lower. You have much lower prices than if you opt for the stable price.
Can you just crystallize that into something meaningful in terms of percentages? So let's say you and I are consumers in Norway. I've gone dynamic, you've gone fixed. In a year, what's the differential?
That's a difficult thing to say because it will vary all the time. But I mean, you can maybe say that there are 2 euro cents times 20,000 kilowatts. So you're looking at considerable. That's like 400 euros type of range.
That's a whole lot bigger than. That's quite. That's a very English phrase, but that's worth getting out of bed for, right?
Yeah, but we have to be honest, because at the continent, also UK and so on, there are lots of heating going on with gas or district heating and so on. So there, of course, the savings are going to be less. But with increasing amounts of volatility, these markets are growing. So I think that it's important to take the next step soon. Otherwise, we'll get a lot of resistance against all of this.
Yeah. So just to do like a halfway through recap, we'll say right, okay, the market that we've grown up with was fit for purpose for the stable generation world. But there is a market that is fit for purpose for this new world, which is the dynamic pricing market. And we've also argued that actually the differential between the two could be significant. So what's stopping the adoption of a dynamic pricing market? Because it seems to me that if you logic it through and you say, right, okay, if we have a dynamic pricing market, we can create fit for purpose markets, buy sell markets, day markets, even ahead markets, and more importantly, we can create an environment that also goes back to making those gas-fired things economical again.
Yeah.
So
I think the last point is maybe a point that we need to explain a little bit better, because in the forward market, that's a market that's dominated by the traditional power plants. Traditional power plants are the coal-fired power plants, nuclear plants, etc. They have their own set of economics. Renewables have hardly any marginal cost, so it's expensive.
Once the capital is done,
expensive to put down a windmill, but once it's there, well, if the wind is blowing, it's hardly any added cost. So what you're seeing in addition to this avoiding of this risk market is that if you could buy purchase the electricity for consumers in the day-ahead market, you would add extra savings because they would benefit of the economics of renewables. And then the really interesting thing happens. Say that 10 or 20% of consumers would opt for such a dynamic price if they would have the opportunity to do it. Well, then demand will go from the forward market to the day-ahead market. If it goes away from the forward market, some of the less efficient traditional power plant will decide to, I'm not going to run, I'm not sold out my capacity. And this will make overcapacity less frequent in the day-ahead market and create better conditions for flexible power plants. So we would solve some of the reserve power financing problem we have in the current market structure. This is really something that has is reacting on the full chain from generation to consumer if we will take the step.
And it makes a lot of sense because, again, with some of the presentations that we've online briefings we've had done on Angerati and everything. Well, one of the curves or one of the graphs that never quite made sense to me, until I've had this crash course in electricity market dynamics is this, and it's a German example. This graph about what was happening with renewables in Germany, 5 years ago, where you had a block down the bottom, which is the base load, and then you had a few wiggles on it, which is the thing, and then you say, and here's what's going to happen in 2050, and the block at the bottom has stayed the same. So. But the renewables are going up and down like a yo-yo, so it's like going. So we're having more renewable generation, but we're keeping that baseload block, and that's crazy. So what you've just articulated will change that, won't it?
Yeah, that will change it, because if there's a dynamic price, it's something people can also save money on. It's demand response, and the experience from Scandinavia is that people don't regularly care about this because people don't want to worry. But if prices really get high or really get low, then that is a reason to maybe invest in energy management systems. Maybe you have an electrical boiler you can remote control when the water is heated and so on. And all of a sudden,
or you have
all
intelligent systems that do it for you.
Yeah, so you shouldn't have to bother with this by yourself. It should be taken out of your hands. It could maybe be a service provided by utilities. But if you do that, you can couple this enormous volatile market and you can do something with that stable baseload block that you're talking about, and the whole energy system is getting much more efficient.
And that would then also affect the economics of energy storage solutions,
so
because they would replace some of that baseload block.
Yeah. So right now there is very little incentive for people to invest in this, but if you have the dynamic pricing mechanism in place, then the whole game is different.
So your argument stacks up. It all makes a lot of sense. Why are we sitting here talking about it? I mean, why isn't? I mean, you mentioned Scandinavia and Norway and other places where this is working. But what's the inertia to adoption?
I think that one thing is that few people really look holistically on the energy chain. So very often, if you look at smart metering and so on, it's either driven from the grid, just looking at the grid benefits and things like that, or it's driven from, okay, what can we save as consumer? But really looking at the whole chain and saying, okay, well, all these blocks and puzzle parts are moving. How do we
everything adds up?
How do we create a system that is working and not something that is trying to emulate what we had in the past? And if people would take the step and look at this way, I think it would be a very quick conclusion that we need to couple the end consumer with what's happening with the generation market. We need to take away some of the cost created by trying to emulate what we always used to have. And there are very easy measures that regulators, but also market participants can take to enable this. And this is what has to happen now.
Because it would also solve some of those issues where you have negative pricing and things like that.
Some people love negative prices,
and it creates media headlines and everything, but it doesn't paint the entire picture. Because if you then follow that entire value stack, you'd say, okay, well, for the end user it's 20 or whatever, but we ended up with that hypothetical figure, which was pretty.
We have done the calculations for Germany, and German consumers every year they are paying 8 billion euros to finance the renewable assets. We think that if people had the opportunity to opt for dynamic pricing, half of that money can be compensated by giving them lower electricity prices. So it's for me it's a big puzzle why people haven't looked and acted on this much earlier.
And also on that renewables with the feed-in tariffs and everything. I mean, I understand why feed-in tariffs were done, but you're now in a different environment. You aren't starting at zero or close to zero. You've got high penetration, so you need to change a little bit. That subsidy model is not sustainable in the full run because everybody's just paying for it. And the smart people will get the better price, like commercial organizations that can hire an energy manager are the ones who are winning, but the people at the bottom aren't.
This is a very simple manner to give tangible benefits of the investments we need to do in renewables for the transition to consumers.
And then following that dynamic pricing model through, the other thing that needs to be in place is the smart meter, right? So we've kind of followed it all the way around, but we've now got a whole different business case for the smart meter, which if you have a dynamic pricing environment, it takes that business case into a new dimension. It's not just what can it save you.
Yeah, and this is nice because it's saving consumers money. They don't have to change their lives and behavior with it. They can even save more if they do that, but this is a very easy way to introduce real benefits for consumers. And I think that if you look at, say, the business case for smart metering in Germany, would look totally different if this would be included. There are some, UK has decided to go ahead, but there are some critical voices now. I think if they would look seriously at this and the impact on the whole chain, it would be a very easy case to argue. So I would encourage everyone who are interested to get in touch.
Get in touch with you, and you can give them the you can give them the deck, and maybe we can distribute it via Enchirati as well, because it all sounds very logical. And just before we go, because we're coming to the end of our time here, can you just highlight any areas in the world where you think they're being very progressive about this, and they've actually got it? They said this is the way to do it.
What I told was you have Norway, who has already had dynamic prices. A big issue in Norway was that they did not have, they did it by measuring meter reads every month, and then everybody got say the same distribution of their energy over a month. So if you had another behavior than what I had, we basically paid the same price if we had the same consumption, while you probably had it very different. And what happened in Norway was that there was a winter a couple of years ago, and this was an area where there had been a lot of new industry built, but no new transmission capacity. Right. So prices went from, say, 12.5 cents to €2 per kilowatt.
Wow, that's
in the middle of the winter.
Yeah, right.
Where people really consume a lot. Mm. And then some consumers, they started really to look, okay, who can I shift my loads when it's at lower cost? But after the month, they got the bill, and of course that was exactly as high as usual, because they
because
moved
it's aggregated over
they
time.
moved the average a tiny little bit,
Yeah.
And people got really angry about it. There was a lot of negative attention, media attention about it. How could it? I did my best, but I still had to pay this high bill. And this was actually the reason why the Norwegian government said, we want everybody to have fair bills. They should be based on the real consumption. So we want everybody has this kind of spot price contract to have their consumption measured hourly, and that's the basis for the pricing. And then they went to the utility and said, well, we're not going to wait until EU standardization is ready for smart meter. You get 4 years, and then you have to roll it 100%, and everybody has the contract. They need to get the fair bill.
And the result, everybody was happy.
Yeah, the utilities are now quite worried because they don't have so much time left.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Well, we like to help them with that.
Well, we'll watch out for them. Generally, it's been fascinating. I hope we did the topic justice, and thank you for your time. Thank you for your time last night as well, running me through it so that we can prepare for this. But it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks a lot for your time.
Okay, thank you for watching as well.